Thank you for joining us today. Marge and I have enjoyed reflecting on our spiritual practices, and we are delighted that Nancy Willette, Irene Gravina, George Eppel, and Sandy Courier, as well as Marge and myself, will be sharing their spiritual practices with us this morning. Let's begin with these thoughts from Nancy Willette. She sent us them, and we are so happy to convey them to all of you. Here's Nancy. I have gratitude for and awareness daily of beauty in its inexhaustible forms. This saves me from paralyzing despair after a short listen to devastating news on CNN, reading more devastating reality in books and articles, and my awareness of colossal agony and evil across the globe. The Navajo people have a strength against evil chant. Beauty before me, beauty above me, beauty all around me. I am blessed with the beauty in the faces of small children, in a tall, short, or wide tree, and the myriad of nature's grand display. Beauty. Looking high above at a sun-struck sky, clouds forming heavy with rain, rain pelting, splashing at my feet. Beauty. Listen to the sounds of water in puddles, streams, ocean waves. Smell the clean, fresh air saturated with the fragrance of flowers. Fresh mowed grass, soil. I am blessed with gifts of eternal beauty in art, music, poetry. A deep bow for the beauty of love and friendship with family and friends. Thank you, Nancy. It is good to be together. We're going to follow the opening words with hymn number 188, Come, Come Whoever You Are, and Cynthia will get us going.
I'd hoped to be able to do this in a round, but there's so few of us, and because we're of necessity sprinkled so far apart, it might be a little daunting. So let's stick with just singing Come, Come Wherever You Are together. If you feel so inspired and you want to join into these little numbers that tell you where to come in, please do so. Let me just give you, yes. Sure, we'll sing it 3 times. That sounds like a good idea. I'll just give you a little intro so you know. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are. Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, let again come.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all here in this space. It has been way too long since we have been here, so it's really wonderful to see you all. So welcome to the First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation. My name is Marge Heckman, and I will be leading the service today along with Liz Connors. This is the fourth in our series of mostly lay-led summer services, and for most of us, our first return to this sanctuary for an actual in-person service. It's good to be here together once again after this last most unusual year. The service will not be broadcast live on Zoom, but is being videotaped and will be available later this week for viewing by those who could not be with us today. Many thanks to Bob Batt, Bob Bass, and Webb Tilney, who are helping with videotaping and sound. Welcome to all of you who are able to join us. It's so nice to see you. If you'd like to know more about what is going on at First Parish this summer, check out our website at uubedford.org. The service next Sunday will be a reprise of a service from last year about the anniversary of Hiroshima. And now let us join together in saying our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And I realized we had thought about doing candles, and I forgot to light a candle, and I'm not sure if we even have any. So I guess what we can do is if anyone has a candle of joy or concern that you'd like to light virtually, you can come up and I can bring the microphone down to you if you have anything. It's a time in our service when we invite people to share any sorrows or concerns or joys in their life. So we'll light a virtual candle for all of those joys and concerns that we keep in our hearts. Before I introduce Irene, who's our first speaker, I'd like to share just a few thoughts about my own spiritual practices. When Liz and I decided on this topic for our service, it was a good opportunity for me to reflect a bit more on my own spiritual journey. I was raised in a fairly traditional Roman Catholic family and attended 12 years of Catholic schools. So my roots are deeply set in the beliefs and rituals surrounding a conventional, organized religion. However, as my life experiences expanded and I was exposed to a greater variety of other belief systems and possibilities for spiritual growth, my own attitudes and practices had major shifts. I do still believe in some type of higher power in the universe, but it is no longer tied to a specific god or goddess. I am grateful for some of the rituals I learned as a child that still have great meaning for me. Along the way, I discovered yoga and meditation as powerful paths on my own spiritual journey. Music and art in many forms and readings from great teachers also inform my spiritual practice. And I have found that spirit can be found anywhere, especially in the beauty of nature that surrounds us. Sitting on the beach and experiencing the sights and sounds of the ocean have always brought me great peace and made me feel connected to something larger than myself. I do believe in prayer, though my prayers these days are not to a particular entity asking for favors of one kind or another, but rather prayers of gratitude for guidance and for all the blessings in my life. We hope that as you listen to the reflections today, it will give you pause to stop and reflect on your own spiritual journey, whatever that may be. And we'll first hear from Irene Gravina. Irene?
Thank you. I was brought up Catholic also, and when I was 13 years old, I asked the nun at CCD class if she could prove that God existed. And yeah, because we were brought up, to be very scientific and everything. And she said, well, it's a matter of faith, and talked about that. And now I think I would appreciate that, but at the time, it didn't really answer my question in my mind. So I kind of walked down the street to the Unitarian Church, was about 2 blocks away, and I already had friends there, and I was already politically involved. So joined LRY and became really active in the church, actually. But that kind of started my spiritual journey. And then I also got into yoga, like Marge was describing, and Tai Chi, and I did some psychological counseling when I was in my late teens. And then and after trying a couple of different kinds of meditation, I tried Transcendental Meditation, which the teachers had come to my campus and put up these signs to come to a lecture, but most of the people in my school were learning because it was very popular back in the 70s. And so I didn't see myself as the kind of person that did what everybody else does, and so I kind of avoided it. And then finally, I had one boyfriend who did TM, another boyfriend who did TM. Finally, the third boyfriend, I met his friend who was a TM teacher, and he just had this, comfortableness in his own skin and happiness. And I don't really admit this to very many people, but because I'm also a TM teacher, and so I'm supposed to be kind of a model, but I'll tell you guys, because you all know me anyway. And so anyway, we had this party, and the teacher was there, and I had quit smoking, and I wasn't drinking alcohol. And I quit smoking pot. And so I wasn't necessarily, heavily involved in those things, but he was standing there with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other, and he still had this thing, And my yoga teacher had told me, I have to be a vegetarian. My Tai Chi teacher told me I should really come and live at the ashram, and this was all to make progress in my spiritual journey. So I wanted to be an American. I was only 18 years old. I wanted to live like an American. I felt like I hadn't even been a regular adult yet. And I felt like, I should be able to eat a hamburger and not, destroy my spiritual development. So anyway, so that was what kind of got me started with TM. And so without boring you with any more details about my life, I'll just say that I've been practicing it for 50 years. I became a teacher fairly quickly after that, and I kept doing it until until the present time, off and on. And so Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a Unitarian minister from a family of Unitarian ministers, I thought I'd read a couple quotes from him about the state that people experience, not just in TM, but Ralph Waldo Emerson used to have this experience in nature. It's a natural state, and it has a name in many different traditions. It's what the Lao Tzu called the Tao. It's what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven within. In Buddhism, it's, let me see what it is in Buddhism. I don't know. Anyway, I have these different things. So it's an experience. It comes when I read you these quotes by Emerson, it sounds like an idea or a philosophy, and many people see it that way. And one can make a philosophy out of it, but what he's really describing is an experience. And he studied the Vedas, which is also the tradition that TM, or the body of knowledge that TM comes from. And he wrote this essay called Nature. And he published it anonymously because it was going to be controversial. And it really kicked off the Transcendentalist movement. And before they knew who wrote it, college students it created a stir, and college students would form little clubs to talk about it. So anyway, he wrote, and I think I'll just mention, if anyone, I'm not going to describe a whole lot about TM today, but because there's a website, tm.org, and so you can go there, and it has, all kinds of information about that. And I know we only have so much time. So, okay, so Ralph Waldo Emerson said, Yet there is a depth in those brief moments which constrains us to ascribe more reality to them than to all other experiences. That great nature in which we rest, as the earth lies in the soft arms of the atmosphere, is that unity, that oversoul, within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. We live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. Meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And this deep power in which we exist, and whose beatitude is all accessible to us, is not only self-sufficing and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the thing seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are one. We see the world piece by piece as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree, but the whole, of which these are the shining parts, is the soul. So it's not quite the soul the way they would describe it in Catholicism, but he's talking about that inner self. And as I said, this is a natural experience. I actually had this experience when I was like 10, and I talked to my parents about it. It's just like Emerson said, it feels very real. In a way, it feels more real than real life. But then there was no context for it, so I kind of just put it in the back of my mind. And then when I started TM, I kind of realized what that was. So anyway, that just gives a little snapshot, of, and what TM is it's a way to experience that with a technique. So you're not relying on just being in nature and sort of having it spontaneously. Although when, as Emerson said, we are in nature, a lot of times, you naturally kind of settle down and you start to see more of the oneness of everything. So anyway, that's a little snapshot, and I can, answer questions or whatever later if someone wants. But that's my journey, and I'm still on it. So.
I've gone down a few roads of spiritual practice, and like Irene and Marge, the first road presented to me as a child was my Catholic school education and Mass every Sunday. Though I stepped away from Catholic practice as an adult, I am grateful for the head and heart space, the constant presence of prayer and devotion that the structure provided. I found something of value in some stillness and reflection beyond the conformity and repetitiveness. Mindfulness, meditation, and Buddhism are now important and enriching to me. One of the Buddha's final teachings was, be a lamp unto yourself. With the support of a principled community and good teachings, our moral and spiritual destiny is in our own hands. But I have circled back to the attraction to prayer, invoking a higher power, though I don't know who or what that may be. I guess I'd call myself agnostic. Presently, I can't know. I've prayed in different ways, asking for help, for comfort, saying thank you. I no longer ask for help or comfort with a formulaic prayer. I no longer express gratitude using a formulaic prayer. But one prayer from the Catholic tradition, attributed to Francis of Assisi, but probably wasn't him, but nonetheless, has struck me. It is not a petition for a favor or a wish. It is not a thank you. I feel it as a call to the goodness and love that I am capable of showing. The words have come down through the Catholic tradition, and they begin with the word Lord. And I think that has to do with old patriarchy. But in spirit, I don't seem to have the copy with me, and I don't want to take up too much of our time, but instead of Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, I would say, borrowing from the Native American tradition, Great Spirit, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is offense, let me grant forgiveness. And so on. I like that prayer, where there is doubt, faith. I like that because it invokes strength. On one hand, it speaks to the doubt, the sorrow, the pain, and invites the speaker. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Marge. So here it is. Great Spirit, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is sadness, joy. O Great Spirit, grant that I may not so much seek to console as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And for some reason, those words have always freed me up from my own hang-ups and hurts and self-focused concerns. So I guess I am going between this sentiment and Buddhism, meditation, be a lamp unto yourself, and I'm pretty comfortable with that, although it remains an open question. The agnosticism remains. But we go day to day and give our best and do our best. With these aspirations in mind, knowing the good we each can do and the community we have received so much from, for the well-being of our community and beyond, the offering will gratefully be received. If you've tuned in on video, please visit the First Parish website, firstparishbedford.org. Marge will come around with a basket, and thank you.
And while this is happening, we can all sing one more step, which is 168 in hymnal. And I'll give a little intro. One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more
now we're going to hear from George Eppel to share his story.
Anyway, when Liz asked me to do this, I immediately said, how can an atheist have anything to say about spiritual practices? So here's how. I consider myself to be an atheist. The OED defines atheism as, quote, a denial of God or gods, and if religion is defined in terms of belief in spiritual things, then atheism is the rejection of religious belief, end quote. I don't believe in God or gods or any type of supernatural entity. Thus, I have no religious beliefs. But what was my path to atheism? The son of a Scottish Presbyterian mother and a father wedded to realism and science, I grew up in the Second Dutch Reformed Church in Somerville, New Jersey. Dutifully attending RE, I thought I was a believer. Upon entering Brown University, I attended morning chapel and Sunday services at churches on, quote, the Hill, the east side of Providence. I went to Congregational, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, and Unitarian, and began to be convinced that I was one of the faithful, but not knowing what that meant. Then came my epiphany. On a train to New Jersey for Thanksgiving with my family, I read a very small book by Dr. Harry Shapiro titled Aspects of Culture. It struck a chord, and upon return, I promptly registered for Introduction to Cultural Anthropology for the next semester. And so began the journey. The more I delved into anthropology, I became a major, the more I realized the fallacy of traditional dogma and organized religion. Each belief system claims to have the truth, the one way that all should follow. I came to understand that belief systems were the creation of individual cultures. The need for explanation of the unanswerable questions: what happens when you die? Why did this sickness befall my family and not some other? And the answers: it's God's will. That is something only God can know. Granted, there is solace in belief, in faith. Okay, I think you can figure that I do not resort to nor rely on prayer. What would I pray to? Mysticism, divination, revelation, oracles, any of those things. Although I respect others who do, and I do have spiritual practices. Being outdoors can be spiritual, as others have already said. I think of the many nights I spent fishing for striped bass along the coasts of New England. It could be magical on a dark, moonless night when the sky was filled with shooting stars and constellations, or the first glimmer of dawn and the rising of the sun, or the panoramic views upon summiting a mountain, or moments kayaking when we got up close with moose, watched an eagle catch a trout, or heard the eerie calls of loons. Those moments in the natural world said to me that there was order in the universe. Then there is music. I go to sleep every night to the magic of Anthony Newman playing Beethoven piano sonatas on forte piano. At times, I resist falling asleep just to remain immersed in the beauty of the sound and the presence of genius. For me, the ultimate spiritual practice is the search for truth and love. I recently read an article in the Boston Globe about Dr. Donald Gare, a child psychologist. Gare was reputed to guide his students with aphorisms, and I was particularly struck by two of them. The first one, truth is the fragile child of skepticism. Dogma is the brutal spawn of certainty. I am an optimist, but that does not prevent me from being a skeptic and dubious of certainty. And the other aphorism, faith is the belief that truth matters. And that resonated with me. So I do have faith, but not in some religious sense, but in the certainty that the truth is truth. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Sandy Courier.
This is a short talk, a spiritual practice that I've been practicing as of late, last 6 or so months. Can be summed up with a quote, remembering the context. So there's a short one on remembering the context. I'm going to start with 2 quotes. This is by Ron Hulnick, who wrote, Remembering the Light Within. When embarking upon the path of spiritual awakening, it is simultaneously a major challenge, opportunity, and blessing to move from ego identification to authentic self-identification. And if you look at that quote, Ron capitalizes certain words, and it's kind of important. So here he has ego not capitalized. And this is not a Freudian sense of the word ego. It's a bigger context in that, pardon the use of that. And the use of authentic self is capitalized. So if you read some of his work or some of this spiritual psychology work, the capitalization is a little bit important. Second quote, and this is the disclaimer to try to get me out of trouble. And it's already been referenced already today. The Tao that can be spoken is not the internal Tao. The name that can be named is not the internal name. And that's from the Tao Te Ching. That's the opening stanza. And the reason that's important for me is because both these quotes are kind of setting up 2 dimensions, 2 contexts, two ways of seeing things. One, and I'm going to use a little bit for reference, I'm going to use the Buddhist tradition here a little bit. One is word-based, particularly in English. It's based on nouns and verbs, subject and objects. This is true both in sentence structure, so I am using nouns and verbs to communicate to you, and you are hearing nouns and verbs. And it's also true in cognition. So as I formulate this to talk, if I'm not too boring and you're paying attention, you're taking it in and you're formulating, you're hearing these nouns and verbs. So it's sequential. There's a sequential aspect to it. And then there's the spiritual path, which is what the capitalization means, concerns getting to know, not that. It's remembering that context in all times, good and bad. And what does it mean by not that? It's not that type of communication. It's not that type of cognition. It's when a favorite word of mine is cognize, which is what's going on in one's head at one time when one's awake. It doesn't matter if it's emotional or thought, but cognition kind of represents that. So there's 2 types of cognition. One is the sequential thing, and one is this non-sequential thing. And many of the traditions talk to this. So we have these powerful typologies, these ways of getting the head to kind of grasp these 2 things. Dichotomies when there's 2. An ancient one is called Samkhya, which uses the words Purusha and Prakriti. In a 5-minute talk, I can't talk about these things, but there's all this great history with that. Tantric, there's Shiva and Shakti. Buddhism, there's dualism and non-dualism. I'll talk a little bit about that. Christianity, heaven and earth. If you're breeding sweetgrass, the Potawatomi have sky world and earth or earth world. So there's these 2 dichotomies that kind of are in these major traditions that we can see. And if we were to ask Joseph Campbell, one of the great mythologists, to come here, he would say, yeah, there's a spiritual dimension or context. And these would be words capitalized. They could be spirit, love, capital, God, if you say that, universal consciousness, Buddha nature, the divine, or just nature. Or even there's earth, it's capitalized. And then there's the worldly dimension or context. For me, being an engineer, I would put into the worldly context anything that's Newtonian, anything that's quantum mechanics, anything that's time and space. So if you're thinking about it or contemplating it or observing it or dealing with it in time and space, you're in the world. And neither one is good, neither one is bad. Both are here all the time. So, one more clarification on these two dimensions. And this is what threw me for years being an engineer. And, you know, in grade school, you have like this plot, this XY plot. You might have like an X and a Y, and you do like, and you have dimensions, and you say, oh, there's two dimensions. And, oh, you can, 2X plus 3X gives you 5X. And 2Y plus 3Y gives you 5Y. And those are two dimensions, right? And I was trying to think of this, and I was going nowhere. And that's because in that analogy of two dimensions, we're using the same framework for both those guys. We're using objects and subjects, noun and verbs, to describe those two dimensions. And so they're the same. But in Buddhism, that's called dualism, when there's two things, when there's an object and a subject. In Buddhism, there's also this concept of non-dualism. And that's a way to describe what non-dualism is say, verbing, just the verb, I am. It's being. If you have the dichotomy of doing and being is when one is not sequentially breaking things up. Another way to look at this, if you were a CEO and you were a petroleum company, you would want to externalize the cost of climate change in your business model. So a lot of business people will externalize something to make the business model work. They externalize costs. Oh, somebody's going to get cancer. Yeah. And that's the worldly dimension, because you're externalizing the awareness of the person. It's all objects. In the spirit dimension, you're externalizing the objectification of that. So it's almost the exact opposite. Another way to explain it, the spiritual dimension is what I call full stack neural networking. So if you're a computer scientist, that might mean something. The worldly dimension I would call the von Neumann machine. And a von Neumann machine is just a computer. It does one thing after another. It goes chunk, 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 chunk. In a neural network, you've got these things happening at the same time. And one is influencing the others influence this, and you can model it, but if you're going to model a neural network with the sequential thing, you're going to end up making something really inordinately complex, and it's, well, that's a whole other thing. So, a couple ways to experience these two things. You can, vision, we have two types of vision. We have foveal vision, which is when you focus on something. So the mind is very focused, and you read a book, you read the sentences, very sequential. And you have peripheral vision, which is where you see things like non-intellectually. But it's really important, because your peripheral vision is where you see movement. If you're out in the savannah and you're out at the grass and the lion moves over here, zoom. So it's like your peripheral vision is really key. But then you can get your foveal vision on the line and make a plan. Oh, I'm going to climb the tree. I'm going to get out of here. You know. So both types of visions are really important. Another example is your hand. You can describe your hand very intellectually. But you can also get out of that mode and like look at your hand and then kind of close your eyes. And if you're quiet and if you're not speaking to yourself, just for a moment, just let it all go, you can experience your hand. And that experience is non-verbal, it's non-sequential, it's an isness, it's a verbing. And so for me, that's what the spiritual dimension is. That's what spiritual practice is. You can, at this point in my life, the words are great. Meditation's great. I've meditated for 20 years, and I still meditate. But you don't have to meditate to experience a beautiful sunrise. You don't have to meditate to experience the joy of looking at a toddler's eyes. So this talk is entitled Remembering the Context. So for me, these past 6 months has been remembering the context of the spiritual dimension at all times, in good or bad. Because in the spiritual dimension, there's no anxiety, there's no stress out there, there's no suffering. I can't say pain because that's not, pain is too much connected to the worldly dimension. But if we allow the word suffering to be that which we generate ourselves, then in the spiritual dimension there is no suffering. And so, there it is. Remember the context. Thank you.
So our closing hymn is For the Earth Forever Turning. I think I'll play a line so that you remember what it's like. 163. Sing we our joyful song of peace. For the mountains, hills, and pastures in their silent majesty. For the stars, for all the heavens, sing we our joyful song of peace. For the sun, for rain and thunder, for the seasons' harmony, for our lives, for all creation, sing we our joyful praise to thee. For the world we raise our voices, for the home that gives us birth. In our joy we sing, returning home to our blue-green hills of earth.
I have two things for our closing words. The first is a poem by Hafiz. I sometimes forget that I was created for joy. My mind is too busy, my heart is too heavy for me to remember that I have been called to dance the sacred dance of life. I was created to smile, to love, to be lifted up, and to lift others up. O sacred one, untangle my feet from all that ensnares. Free my soul that we might dance, and that our dancing might be contagious. And finally, these words from Nancy Willett. I have a small meditation table against my front room window. It holds small, beautiful, and meaningful treasures from my family, Helen, Laura, and Sophie, and two friends, Doris and Sharon. A candle stands on a base made by Doris Smith and held firm with a 300 million years old Petoskey rock from Sharon MacDonald. I begin the day by first lighting the candle. I express gratitude for many blessings, a long list. I sit quietly. I begin a simple meditation, focusing on my breath. May we believe in one another, hold tight with hope. May we celebrate and enjoy what we can. May we soften the pain and grief within us and beyond us. With love and light from Nancy. Amen and blessed be. Thank you all for coming today.